I've been journaling since 2016, and for the longest time, I thought I didn't have a journaling style. I've come to realize that is not the case, I definitely do, but figuring out what my journaling style wasn't an easy feat. In this video, we're going to look at how to identify your own journaling style, and also why you should even care what your journaling style is. Before we get into that though, what is a personal journaling style, and what kind of elements does it involve? Oftentimes when people think about journaling styles, they're thinking about particular terms and phrases, things like minimalist, maximalist, cottagecore, dark academia, those kind of things. But there's actually a lot more that goes into it, and oftentimes those terms can be a little bit reductive. One of the biggest parts of personal journaling style is going to be decoration, so what types of decoration you use, what types of materials you use to do your decoration, but it isn't just limited to this. If we think about materials in particular, these don't all have to be used specifically for decoration, but the types of materials you tend towards become part of your style. Are you the kind of person who likes to use pens only, or are you also whipping out paints, stickers, washi tapes, anything like that? As said, these items don't just have to be used for decoration, they can be used for function as well. We can also think about our journaling style in terms of the layouts that we're selecting. Are there particular types or stylings of layouts that you tend towards more often? Are you the kind of person to go with a calendar view monthly log or a vertical style, or do you just not include a monthly log at all? All of those aspects are also going to make up part of your personal style. Other elements we can think about are the use of color on your pages, whether you completely fill the space and make very full pages, or go for layouts that utilize more white space. We can think about the type of lettering we use, so do we gravitate more towards our regular handwriting, or do we do some other types of hand lettering and font use, either by recreating different fonts by hand or just printing them off and sticking them into our journals. A lot of the time, our personal journaling style is going to come back to the purpose of our journals though. If your journal is dedicated as being a creative space for you, then the style that you use in there is probably going to look fairly different to somebody who's using it more strictly for productivity and just getting things done. When we think about what personal journaling style is, it can also pay to think about what it isn't. I very much believe that your personal journaling style is not fixed. It's going to change based on a range of different factors. For instance, it could change based on the journal you're using. So if it's a reading journal versus your regular journal versus a journal for health and well-being, the style that you use in each of those might be different, just so that you can get the things done in those places that you want to. We can effectively see this as changing up the purpose for each of those journals, and thus the style that we use changes with it. Your style can also change with your budget. If you're trying to be more cost-effective in the way you're doing your journaling, then some materials that you might otherwise use might be kinda off limits to you. Maybe if budget wasn't a factor, there'd be particular materials that you utilize more often, but because you're going for more cost-effective options, you're not utilizing those things. That's not to say that your journaling style will be any less than because you're trying to be more money conscious, it just means that things are going to look a little different. We can also find that our journaling style will change over time. This could be because our purpose for journaling changes, our life situation might change, the amount of time, effort, and energy we have to give to our journaling practice might change, and thus the style we're utilizing can change with that. One of the biggest things that I've found has changed my journaling style is actually just the journal itself, or more specifically what type of journal I was using. For instance, what paper color and paper thickness. I'm the type of person who does not like ghosting and bleeding in my journal, so when I moved into thicker paper notebooks, I was more likely to do things like utilizing paint and more decorative heavy layouts. Another thing our journaling style isn't is a rigid box to hold ourselves in to prevent growth. I very much think about this in the same way as when people say, "Oh, I could never do that in my journal, I'm not creative." When we say these kind of things to ourselves, it holds us back from the ability to experiment and try new things and build new skills. As we already mentioned, our journaling style can change over time, so just because your current style isn't maybe as artistic or creative as you'd like it to be, doesn't mean you can't get to a point where you are more artistic or creative, if that's what you want to do. Another thing that a journaling style is not though, is a line in the sand to say whether somebody else's journaling is right or wrong. One of the things I love about our community is that we do have diversity. We have a lot of different journaling styles, which means that we have a lot of inspiration out there for pretty much any type of journaling style. Just because one person is doing a lot of creative art in theirs, using a lot of paints and watercolors and whatever else, doesn't mean that we have to do that. Similarly, there might be other people out there who are using washi tapes and PET tapes and stickers. If that's not the type of creativity that you want to bring to your journal, then that's totally fine as well. So if we're not going to use the description of a journaling style to say whether somebody else's journaling is right or wrong, hopefully not, I don't want us to be doing that. What do we use our journaling style for? Why does it matter that we know what it is? One of the biggest reasons why it pays to know what your own journaling style is so that you can be satisfied with your own journaling. When it comes to seeing a lot of inspiration pictures online, oftentimes we can fall into the comparison trap. This is where we're looking at somebody else's creation and thinking, oh gosh, if only my journal could look like that. I wish mine looked like that. I wish I could do those things. And as we said before, with practice, we can totally learn to do those things. It's alright if you're not there yet. If you want to get there, I believe that you can do this. But more so by identifying our own journaling style and how it's different from other people's, we can be more satisfied with what we create. For instance, I know that my current journaling style doesn't rely heavily on detailed drawings. If I'm doing decoration in my journal, it's not usually because I'm whipping out pencils and colored markers or anything like that, and drawing effectively what are mini artworks that are super detailed. There are journalers out there who do that kind of thing, and they make absolutely amazing layouts, but if I sit here and compare my journal to what theirs look like, without taking into account that that's not my journaling style, I'll probably end up getting really down on myself, thinking that my journal doesn't measure up to that standard. By identifying my personal journaling style, it gives me something to consider when I'm looking at those images online. I can appreciate that they are gorgeous, they are beautiful, they are definitely something I would love to be able to do, but they don't fit into my style right now, and thus I'm not going to be spending the time, effort, and energy to create that kind of thing. Speaking about time, effort, and energy, this is also something that can benefit from identifying our own journaling style. If we know the kind of things that are within our style, the things that make us feel good about our journals, then we can make sure we're pouring our resources into the things that make us feel good. For instance, I know that with my current journaling style, I really like it to have printed headers. I just like the different styles of lettering that I can use, and I don't have to draw them out myself, rather than spending my time, effort, and energy trying to recreate these fonts in my journal by hand. I can just type them up on the computer, print them off, stick them in, and then spend any extra time, effort, energy, resources in other spaces in my journal, or getting things done, considering that's what my journal's primarily for. Another reason identifying your personal style can be really beneficial is saving money, especially when we jump onto certain websites that have a huge range of different things that we can include in our journals. We've got the tapes, we've got the stickers, we've got the beautiful papers. What can end up happening is that we fill up our carts very quickly and end up spending a bunch of money on things that we're not actually going to end up using. I am not going to sit here and preach journal minimalism in terms of the supplies you're using, because I have quite a stash and I'm probably not going to stop anytime soon, but by examining my journaling style a little more closely, it means I can make more informed choices about what other materials I'm bringing into my stash. By knowing how you typically utilize those materials, you can be more mindful about which ones you do purchase versus the ones you don't. It can be a little bit upsetting when you have items in your stash that you bought because you thought they were beautiful, you thought that they would be certainly something you'd use in your journal, but they don't necessarily align with what you actually do in your journal. So they end up sitting on your desk or in a drawer, just waiting to get used and making you feel guilty about having spent your money on it and now not using it. I do not want journaling to be a guilt-inducing process for you, so by identifying your journaling style first, you can be more mindful about which items you do pick up. Another reason that identifying your journaling style can be helpful though, is giving you a starting point for experimentation. A lot of people who come into journaling for the first time, having seen inspiration online and thinking, oh wow, that looks awesome, I want to do that, oftentimes can get a little bit overwhelmed or possibly a little disheartened when the creations they're making don't align with what they've seen online. By taking the time to identify our style before we start, so thinking about our current skill sets, about what we currently tend towards, elements that we typically use, we can then branch out and expand our horizons to different styles in a more intentional way. For instance, if you're the type of person who previously hasn't used gouache paint in your journal ever, then expecting yourself to be able to paint a full landscape scene in your journal with minimal help and a gorgeous amount of detail might be asking a little bit more of yourself than is reasonable. By identifying yourself as a novice or as a beginner to start with though, you've identified a starting point that you can branch out from in a more stepwise manner. Maybe for instance, doing trial pieces on separate paper rather than directly into your journal. If you like the finished product, then bringing it into your notebook. Or as another example, if you're just getting started with lettering, maybe you don't go with a soft tip brush pen to do traditional calligraphy. Maybe instead you experiment with fake calligraphy or faux-ligraphy, just while you're getting more comfortable with your letter forms and where the thickened sections should be. So now as we know what a personal journaling style is, what it isn't, and why we should care about it, how do we identify identify our own personal journaling style. One of the easiest ways to do this is look back through your journal and try to pick out any repeated elements. These could be types of decoration, placements of decoration, colors that you typically like to use, layouts that you gravitate towards, anything like that. If you've used it repeatedly, it's probably because it either works well for you or you like it. And these are all going to be aspects of your journaling style. For instance, flipping through my journals, my journaling style is very much related to the bullet journal method. So I tend to use bullet pointed lists for a lot of the things I need to do, also for notes, thoughts, and feelings, rather than doing long form journaling, where I'm writing full sentences or paragraphs. In terms of repeated elements that I like to use, I do love a second line highlight, and I'll usually do this in a pale colored pen. When I use ruled lines in my journal, I typically go for thicker ruled lines rather than thinner ones. And if we're thinking about the styling of layouts, a great example is the monthly log, which I pretty much always use a monthly calendar for. These bits and pieces of my journaling style don't necessarily come under one very nice and neat header like minimalism or maximalism, but they are the individual building blocks of my style. One of the reasons that I don't tend towards those particular terms or phrases for describing a style is that I do find them a little bit restrictive, but when you're just getting started with thinking about the kind of style that you have, it can be useful to play a this or that type game. This is effectively just done by taking some terms that could define our style and thinking about their pairings or their opposites. Now, I do not think of this as a binary thing. We're not just going to be like completely messy or completely neat. It can change with an individual setup or an individual layout, but oftentimes there is a side we tend towards for each of these descriptors. This list is definitely not exhaustive. There are other terms we can use as well, and let me know if you have any ideas in the comment section. But going through, we can think about, is your journaling more digital, more analog, or very much one or the other? I tend to use both, but I do tend towards the analog side, so I can place myself here. In terms of decorated versus not decorated, it is journal dependent, but if we're thinking about my everyday journal, I do tend towards decoration. In terms of being an experimenter or being consistent, this is thinking about the types of layouts you use, whether you're trying new things, whether that be the structures of them, the layouts themselves, what things you're including. I tend to be more of an experimenter, mainly because I get bored with my journal if I don't change things up. In terms of colorful versus monochrome, we're really just thinking about how many colors do you use when you do a setup. As we already said, this can totally change from month to month, but I do tend to be more colorful than I am monochromatic, and we're not necessarily just thinking black and white here, we're really just thinking about how many colors are you using. Black and white is more monochrome, but so is just using blue. In terms of those colors, do you tend to be more bold in those, like very saturated, very punchy, or more soft and kind of pastel? I usually go for more bold colors. And when I build out a color palette, I'm usually going for things that are complementary, so I'll try and have a pop of a different hue in there, rather than going with analogous colors. So for instance, complementary would be something like purple and yellow, whereas analogous would be yellow and orange. Of course, very much dependent on the setup, but I do tend to usually have some kind of a complementary pairing. In terms of messy versus neat, this can be thought of in terms of your writing if you want to, or in terms of your decoration. Are we going more kind of sketchy, or are you preferring more crisp line work? I do typically tend towards the neat side. And if we're thinking about big picture versus small details, you can think about this in terms of decoration, but I was more so thinking about it in terms of your writing. So when you're making a list for the day, do you like to break it down into small individual steps, or do you keep it kind of surface level and just have the big picture recorded? I do fall towards the middle depending on where I'm recording the information, but I like to have that detail in there, so just tending slightly towards that side. For supply heavy versus supply light, this is how many supplies or different types of supplies you're using in your setup. I usually tend towards supply heavy, but not super heavy. I don't usually use a very extensive range of supplies, but I do use more than just one in any given setup. For white space versus full, this is effectively describing how much white space you include in your layouts. So do you give a lot of breathing room to the different elements or sections on your layouts? I typically prefer my layouts to be a bit more busy or a bit more full, so I'll be over here. But just because I'm using a lot of the space doesn't necessarily mean it's visually heavy. Like, it can be if you're using a lot of visually heavy elements, like things that are very dark or pull focus, but you can have a very full layout that's still visually light if those things that are filling the space are quite delicate, small, fine in terms of their line work. That being said though, I do still tend towards visually heavy. In terms of macro versus micro organized, this is thinking about how you break down the sections of your layouts. Do you like things to be kind of contained to smaller boxes with a very specific type of information being stored in them? Or do you just keep everything kind of together and be like, oh yep, this is my project's layout, rather than this is the very specific sections that describe each of my projects? I tend towards more of a micro-organized system. I like everything to have its own set specific space, so breaking a larger layout down into smaller sections to record different types of information. In terms of my journaling style, I am very much towards the bulleted end. I don't really like doing long-form journaling. In my reading journal, it's more long-form rather than bulleted, but in my everyday journal, bulleted is where I sit. In terms of pre-structured versus as you go, this is thinking about how you set up the layout as you use it. So are you kind of setting everything up at once and then filling it in throughout the week or month or however long you're using the layout for? Or is it the kind of layout that's very much a build as you go type thing? In terms of my daily logs, a build as you go method is usually what I go for, but for my monthly layouts, I go with pre-structured. So I kind of sit in the middle depending on what type of layout we're looking at. The one we have at the bottom here though is pre-planned versus on the fly. This is thinking about when you set up your journal, do you go in with a plan of where all of the elements are going to go, or do you just put pen to paper and figure it out as you go along? I am very much more the person who does a pre-planned kind of system. I like to know where everything's going to go before I start setting it up, mainly because I'm often recording it, so it's nice to go in with a plan, but also I want to make sure that everything fits. Now, just because I have put my crosses in certain places does not mean that this is the only way to journal. These are just terms that I can use to describe my personal journaling style, and you can use them to describe yours too. We do have this sheet available as a free download in our resource library. That one's linked in the description box below if you wanted to nab it for yourself. Let me know some of the terms that you use to describe your journaling style, and now that we have a better idea of what our styles are, we can get into planning our journal layouts with more intention. If you wanted to see the process that I use to pre-plan my journaling layouts, then this video is the next one to check out. I like to do all of my pre-planning digitally because then I don't have to pencil and erase and re-pencil and re-erase things. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.